Last year, the end came rather quickly. When his carburetor wouldn't carb, his generator wouldn't gen, and his pistons wouldn't work either. Before we begin the closing ceremony, are there any among us who would like to say a few words in honor of his next of kin, Joe and Mr. Evinrude? Are there any among us who would like to say a few words? Who's first?
Tim is...
I'm going to go last once we put the lid on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, anybody else here?
Joe, 2 years ago, when we were towing your sorry ass in, we stopped to have a beer in Willow Narrows, and I said to my Captain Tim, how deep is it here? He said 20 feet. I said, Joe, let her go. And you left that sorry son of a bitch on the boat, and here it reappeared again.
I threw away my fish scale from arguing with the A-boat.
I was looking for a fish scale to bury with this.
Yeah.
It wasn't at 20 feet.
It's in his box, probably.
It's Joe's next to kin. His son wants to speak.
Well, he's, I think the root one.
Oh,
Root.
sorry.
Yeah, Joe, you know, I didn't know him very well, but I knew his brother. And we put the nitrous oxide on his brother.
There's part of him that's his
Well,
brother.
that part is still here. Well,
The other two different.
this didn't work on the other part, and I know it didn't work on this one, so we're going to bury this with it.
Oh,
You
no.
know, yeah, I mean,
How will we reach top speed?
we tried. That's 100 horsepower in this bottle. We strapped it on there a few years ago, and
You still couldn't beat us out the river.
yeah, we have a hard time. But we'll get you next time. After,
Took us over the beaver dam.
well, yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah, we did jump the beaver dam. So.
That'll give you top speed on the way to hell.
Amen. Amen. So that's one in there with it. I'm sorry.
My turn?
Yeah.
Well, I sit down yesterday morning right before work to put some thoughts together as to what I was going to say today, because it's a very emotional time for me. It is very emotional.
I can imagine.
I've had to live for 38 years with this kind of stuff. And what I mean by that is simply, my dad and my grandfather were extremely good at resurrecting the dead. The dead automobiles, the dead motorhomes.
Yeah, that's for sure.
If I could, yeah, well that's a whole nother eulogy of the boat. It needed to die many years before it did. My grandfather bought a motorhome, and I just have to tell this brief story.
30 seconds.
Oh no, I have. I'm the next kid. So I have. You guys are here. My grandfather resurrected a motorhome that was rolled over. It was a late model motorhome in 1979. It was a Winnebago. It had a Dodge chassis for all you gearhead rooters here. I know you would know what that would mean. But my grandfather took a motorhome that was tore in two and bolted it back together.
Amen.
I got to know my father by that motorhome and my father's abilities to make an old Dodge chassis run. Because he was bent over the motor compartment all the time like this as we were on a trip. So this motor, which had spark plugs in it when we started out our trip this year, from my grandfather's tackle box. And just for those of you who don't know, my grandfather died in 1984. And those spark plugs were brand new, but they were old and they weren't the right spark plugs, because I know my dad would hold one spark plug up to the other, not caring about the numbers on them, and would say, well, it's not any longer, it's not going to hit the top of the piston, this will be fine, and screw it in. So when we started this motor this year, it was missing. It had already fouled the plug, and we hadn't even left the river. We hadn't even got away from the dock, and it had fouled the plug. I pointed this out to my father, and he didn't like that. I I pointed out that he shouldn't have used Champion spark plugs in a two-stroke. He didn't like that either. And then he pointed out to me that they were my grandfather's spark plugs from 30 years ago in a tackle box that's probably been in his basement
For 30 years.
for at least 30 years.
They were new.
They were new.
At some point, they were. Yeah.
And they weren't even the right ones, were they?
Right, Ed. Keep going.
So I made my attempt to try to help my father resurrect the Evinrude here. In closing, I would just like to say I really firmly believe, Reverend Mr. Nels, that I made a good, solid attempt to adjust the low-speed circuit on the carburetor so we didn't have to power troll anymore. And I just...
You can't power control that one.
Oh yeah, we were trolling wide open. But nonetheless, I would just like to say I know that some of you are probably a bit taken aback about burying an Evinrude, but there's been several motors, snowmobiles, motorhomes, boats,
Big boat. Yeah.
cars
I would love dynamite in that one.
that we should have buried many years ago. And knowing my father, he will once again try to resurrect his Evinrude. And
You
that's,
mean he's gonna come back out here and dig this sucker up?
that's all I have.
One dig the hole deep.
You want to close the casket now, sir?
Wait a minute.
Maybe Shu has one more.
Everybody back up, please. Back up. Back up. Okay. Now, it'd be appropriate that we shouldn't bury a motor that may be still alive. So, ciao. Buonasera. Arrivederci. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye, motor.
That sucker is
Now put that baby on there.
Okay.
Now you close in again, please. Just a moment. Just a moment. And now, my brethren and sisterin, we come to the moment when we must commit Mr. Evinrude to his final resting place. We should rejoice because he will be joining several of his friends that he might know intimately because some of them are actually a part of him.
Indeed they are.